Hey everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel Story Villa, and drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sending you stories just like this one. Alright, here we go. There were 4 of us crammed into my beat-up Ford Explorer on that sticky August night, making the long drive from Manhattan, Kansas, all the way to Chicago. Jake kept fiddling with the radio like it owed him something while Carlos sat in the passenger seat, counting the stack of cash we'd pulled together for gas money. In the back, Tommy had stretched himself across the seat, already dozing off, even though he swore up and down earlier that he'd stay awake the whole trip. We'd only graduated from K-State a few months ago, and I was on my way to start my first job at a software firm downtown. The guys wouldn't let me go alone, said we needed one last road trip, one last adventure, before life pulled us all in different directions. Every inch of the Explorer was stuffed with boxes and bags, crammed in so tightly I couldn't even see out the rear view. We'd been rolling for around 6 hours when Carlos started groaning about needing to stretch. The GPS showed a rest stop, about 15 miles ahead, smack in the middle of nowhere on Highway 36. Jake was driving by then, his eyes narrowed at the empty ribbon of asphalt. We hadn't seen another vehicle in more than an hour. Static was all the radio would give us, and Tommy had quit searching for a station. That's when the faded blue Riverside Rest Area sign came into view, barely lit by our headlights. Jake steered off the highway without any of us saying a word. We all needed the break. Maybe a snack, maybe just to breathe something other than recycled AC air. The place was exactly what you'd imagine out here, a couple of squat brick buildings, with buzzing fluorescent lights, a few picnic tables sagging in the dark, and a cracked parking lot that had seen better decades. Only one other vehicle sat there, a dingy white panel van tucked way back near the tree line. Jake parked near the main building, and we spilled out, stretching our stiff legs. The night air clung to us, thick and wet, heavy with crickets and that deep country smell you never get in the city. Carlos made a beeline for the restroom, while Jake started doing exaggerated stretches beside the car. Tommy shook out a cigarette from his Marlboro pack and wandered toward the trees behind the buildings. Going to smoke, he muttered, already. Half vanished before anyone could answer. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m., dead signal. The vending machines looked ancient, most of their buttons dead, but I managed to shake a Coke loose. Jake leaned against the Explorer, staring at his phone like sheer willpower might summon a bar of service. That's when I noticed it. The white van's engine was on. Had it been running when we pulled in? I couldn't remember. The windows were pitch dark, hiding whatever was inside. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to ignore it. Just road trip paranoia, nothing more. Carlos came out cracking jokes about the bathroom graffiti, and we all laughed too loudly in the quiet. Tommy had been gone maybe 5 minutes when it happened, a sound, sharp and heavy, like a sack of concrete hitting the dirt. Then silence. Jake froze mid-sentence, and we all turned toward the woods. The crickets had stopped. Even the air seemed to hold still. Tommy, Jake called out, his voice not quite steady. No reply. Carlos started toward the trees, but I grabbed his arm. The van's passenger door hung open now. I knew it hadn't been before. A figure moved in the shadows among the trees, too distant to see clearly. Then Tommy burst out of the woods, pale as chalk, his cigarette gone, his steps frantic like something was behind him. Get in the car, he rasped, barely above a whisper. Now, get in the car. He shook like a leaf, and something dark stained his shoes. Mud, maybe, maybe not. We didn't question it. His eyes told us all we needed. Jake's hands fumbled at the keys while we piled in. Tommy dove into the back and curled himself low. As the engine roared, I caught sight of movement near the van. A man emerged, tall, dressed in coveralls and boots, dragging something wrapped in a blue tarp that smeared a dark trail across the pavement. The shape was unmistakably human. Our headlights swept across him as Jake slammed into reverse, and for a heartbeat, his eyes locked on mine. His face was bland, ordinary except for the chilling lack of emotion. He dropped the tarp and started walking toward us. Jake tore out of that rest stop like the devil himself was on our bumper. The Explorer fishtailed onto the highway, tires screaming. Tommy lay curled on the floor of the back seat, gasping short, jagged breaths. "He killed someone," he kept repeating. "I saw him in the woods. He had a hammer." So much blood. Carlos twisted around in the seat, watching behind us. For a moment, there was only empty dark. Then, 2 minutes later, a single headlight flared in the distance. The van, only one headlight working. Jake pushed the speed past 90, then 100. The Explorer rattled like it might come apart, but that light kept gaining. "What did you see exactly?" I asked Tommy, trying to steady my voice. He lifted his head slightly, eyes still locked on the back window. "I went farther into the trees than I meant to. I needed to piss. There was this clearing. The van was parked there, hidden. He was standing over her, a woman. She wasn't moving. He hit her again anyway, just to be sure. Then he started wrapping her in the tarp." Tommy's voice cracked. "He saw me. I stepped on a branch. He looked right at me and smiled." The headlight was close now, the van holding steady behind us, not passing, just matching every move. Jake swerved hard onto an exit without warning, tires howling, praying to shake him. But the van followed. We were swallowed by a county road, darker and narrower than the highway. No lights, no houses, nothing but cornfields stretching on both sides. Then the van lunged forward, slamming into our bumper. The Explorer jolted forward so violently that Jake almost lost control of the wheel. Carlos, panicked, was on his phone, desperately waving it around to find a signal to call 911 nothing. The van rammed into us again, harder this time, and the sound of metal crunching filled the car. "There," I yelled, spotting a glowing gas station sign in the distance. "Head there." Jake floored it, the engine screaming in protest as we surged forward. For a split second, the van eased back, and I almost believed we'd shaken him. But then his high beams snapped on, flooding us with blinding white light. He came from the side this time, swerving hard to force us off the highway. Jake yanked the wheel to the right, tires spitting gravel as we slid onto the shoulder. Ahead, the gas station came into view, a 24-hour truck stop, buzzing bright and alive even at 4 o'clock in the morning. Jake swerved into the lot, nearly smashing into a diesel pump, before screeching the Explorer to a stop. Without hesitation, all 4 of us bolted out, sprinting toward the glowing entrance. I risked a glance back and saw the van lingering at the edge of the lot, parked just beyond the circle of lights, the driver motionless, watching us. Inside, the world felt jarringly normal: truckers sipping coffee, travelers grabbing snacks, people living their lives, oblivious to the nightmare we'd just escaped. Carlos rushed to the nearest security guard, spilling everything in a frantic jumble: the chase, the blood, the murder. The guard looked doubtful at first, but when his eyes fell on our faces, pale, shaking, drenched in sweat, he grabbed his radio and called the police. We clustered near the humming coffee machines, trembling, while I kept my eyes locked on that van outside. It lingered for a minute, maybe 2, before slowly backing away and vanishing into the desert night. 20 minutes later, 2 state troopers arrived, calm and patient. Taking our statements like this wasn't the first time they'd heard such a story. More units were dispatched to check the rest area. We stayed huddled inside the truck stop for 3 hours, guzzling coffee and flinching at every noise, every new face that walked through the door. Around 7 a.m., one of the troopers returned. They'd found the clearing Tommy had described: blood on the ground, drag marks, van tire Tracks but no body, no driver, no vehicle. An APB went out, and they told us we'd need to come in to identify photos and possibly sit with a sketch artist. The Explorer sat in the lot battered, its bumper crushed. The driver's side streaked with long scrapes, hard proof that none of this was just in our heads. Eventually, we limped into Chicago after finishing statements and getting the car inspected. Over the next few weeks, the police called us with updates. They'd uncovered similar crime scenes at other rest areas, stretching back years. Always the same pattern, always a van seen nearby. They never caught him. The whole ordeal shattered us in different ways. Tommy moved back home to Nebraska, saying he couldn't stand being far from family anymore. Jake still refuses to drive once the sun sets. Carlos spiraled into an obsession with true crime podcasts, endlessly searching for parallels. And me, I stayed in Chicago, kept my job at the tech company, but I've never driven that highway again. Sometimes I scroll the news for stories of rest area killings, searching for traces of him, wondering if he still prowls those roads. The detective who led our case retired last year, but before leaving, she called me. She said ours was one of the rare cases that ended with survivors, the ones who got away. And then she told me something that still freezes my blood at night. Over the years, they'd uncovered 12 victims, all young women, all killed the way Tommy described. That night, we'd interrupted him. If we hadn't pulled in when we did, there would have been 13. I was 23 then, fresh out of college. Driving my battered Toyota Corolla from Albuquerque to Los Angeles for my first real job at a marketing firm. It was late September, 2022. The kind of desert night where the temperature plunges 30 degrees after sundown and the stars feel impossibly close. I'd already been on the road 6 hours, running on caffeine and podcasts just to stay awake. The highway stretched on forever, a ribbon of black broken only by fading taillights in the distance. Back then, I felt untouchable, convinced that bad things happen to other people, not someone with a bright future ahead. My parents had warned me about driving alone through the desert at night, but I'd brushed them off with the careless arrogance of someone who'd never truly been afraid. Around 2 a.m., just past the Arizona border, my bladder finally screamed loud enough to ignore no longer. I'd hoped to make it to a bigger town, but the next exit promised services, and I couldn't wait. The off-ramp ended at a lonely gas station, its flickering fluorescent lights struggling against the dark. The battered sign read "Desert Stop 24 hours", the paint chipped and peeling. Only one other vehicle sat there, a rusted pickup truck angled awkwardly by the air pump. I rolled up to pump 3, closest to the shop, and killed the engine. Through dirty glass, I spotted the clerk middle-aged, slouched behind the counter, face bathed in the glow of his phone. The whole place gave me a chill, but my body's urgency outweighed my instincts. I pocketed my keys, but foolishly left my purse on the passenger seat. Mistake number 1. The desert air stung like ice as I stepped out, the distant howl of coyotes echoing off the emptiness. My flip-flops smacked against cracked asphalt as I hurried toward the entrance. The glass doors were plastered with faded handwritten ads: cold beer, hot coffee, barely legible now. The door chimes screeched like metal, grinding on metal as I pushed inside. The clerk barely looked up, cap greasy, thumbs glued to his screen. The bathroom was at the back, past shelves of stale candy and dusty chips. The key hung from a massive wooden block, ladies carved into it. Disgusted, I grabbed it and hurried on. The bathroom was every nightmare cliché: graffiti-coated walls, a warped stall door, a mirror so scratched it blurred my reflection. The flickering fluorescent buzzed, casting warped shadows that made me rush. No soap in the dispenser, so I rinsed with water and wiped my hands on my jeans. When I came out, the clerk had moved. He was now at the front window, rigid, staring into the lot. Something about his posture made me freeze. I followed his gaze, but all I saw was my Corolla, parked under a harsh white light, Uneasy, I dropped the heavy key on the counter with a thunk and pushed outside. The cold hit again, and then I saw him. A man was sitting in my driver's seat, hands gripping my steering wheel, staring straight ahead like the car was his. My mind short-circuited. I actually walked closer before the horror registered. A stranger in my locked car. He wore a grimy denim jacket stained across the front. From 20 feet away, I could see greasy strands of long hair hanging around his face. My purse was gone from the passenger seat. Logic screamed at me to run back inside, but my legs carried me forward anyway, locked in some trance of disbelief. I stopped right at the car, peering in. He turned toward me, and I'll never forget that face pal. Almost colorless gray eyes glowing under the lights, and a scar cutting from eyebrow to jaw, tugging his mouth into a crooked sneer. Then he smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch that made my stomach lurch. With casual familiarity, he reached over and pressed the unlock button. The click of the locks disengaging shattered the silence like a gunshot. He opened the door and stepped out, my purse swinging from his hand. He was taller than I'd guessed, easily 6'3", thin as a rail. The stench hit immediately, sweat and something chemical, sharp like paint thinner. "Nice night for a drive," he said, voice soft and almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. My throat clamped shut. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. That's when survival snapped me out of the fog. I spun on my heels and bolted, my flip-flops flying off within seconds. The asphalt tore into my bare feet, but I didn't care. Behind me, heavy boots thundered, closing fast. I was within 10 feet of the door when he caught me. His hand twisted into my hair and yanked back so violently, I thought my neck would snap in half. I slammed onto the pavement, my elbow tearing open as it scraped against the rough asphalt. At last, a sound ripped free of me, a scream, so raw and desperate, it felt like it came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. He was on me instantly. One hand crushed against my mouth, the other arm locking around my waist like iron. I bit down, hard, teeth sinking into his palm, until the copper taste of blood filled my mouth. He cursed, jerking his hand away, and I screamed again, louder, fighting for my life. Through the glass of the gas station window, I saw the clerk staring out at us, phone in his hand. But he didn't dial, he didn't come out. He just stood there, watching, as if he were entertained by my terror. The man dragged me backward, toward my car, his grip unrelenting. My bare feet scraped over the ground, skin ripping open, leaving smeared trails of blood across the pavement. I clawed at anything within reach, the air hose, a dented trash can, even cracks in the asphalt, but nothing held. He was too strong, and my body was wearing down. My screams shredded my throat, black spots flickering at the corners of my vision. This is where it ends, I thought. In a lonely gas station parking lot, with that useless clerk letting it happen. Then came the sound, the low thunder of a diesel engine. Headlights swept over us as a massive 18-wheeler veered into the lot. The man froze, grip faltering, eyes darting toward the truck. Air brakes hissed as it halted, the driver's door bursting open before the vehicle even settled. A woman leaped down, maybe in her 50s, stocky and powerful, clad in a flannel shirt and heavy work boots. Her eyes locked on us, and she didn't hesitate. "Let her go," she roared, her voice booming across the lot. A tire iron gleamed in her hand, raised like a weapon. The man dropped me instantly, and I collapsed on the pavement, gasping for breath. His eyes flicked between me and the woman, weighing his chances. But she was already storming forward, tire iron gripped like a bat. "Touch her again, and I'll smash your skull in," she bellowed. Behind her, I noticed her rig still running, CB radio crackling with static voices. She must have already called for help. The man stepped back, then again, his smile curling as he dropped my purse and lifted his hands, pretending surrender. But his eyes stayed locked on me, glinting with malice. "See you around," he muttered low. Just for me. Then he turned and bolted into the darkness beyond the lights. She didn't chase him. Instead, she knelt at my side, her rough hands gentle as she helped me upright. You okay, sweetheart? Did he hurt you bad? Her voice had shifted, no longer thunder but warm and motherly. I couldn't form words yet, only pointed to my throat. She understood immediately. Don't strain your voice. Come on, we'll call the real cops. That coward in there sure as hell won't. She glared toward the clerk, who had finally crept outside but lingered back. She hauled me up, and when I stumbled on my bloodied feet, she scooped me into her arms like I weighed nothing. Carrying me to her truck, she sat me on the passenger seat, rummaged for a first aid kit, and began gently cleaning and wrapping my torn soles. While she worked, she talked, her voice steady. Her name was Brenda. 30 years on the road, seen more than most. She'd spotted men like him before. She even remembered his face, said she'd seen him loitering by the women's restroom at a Flagstaff rest stop 2 weeks earlier, before security ran him off. Pulling out her phone, she dialed 911, speaker on so I could hear. 20 minutes later, a state trooper arrived, close by on patrol. By then, my voice had returned as a raspy whisper, and I gave my statement from Brenda's cab while she held my hand tight. Officer Fitzgerald was young but sharp. He photographed my injuries, the blood streaks on the pavement, and pulled the station's security footage. When the clerk tried to sneak away, Fitzgerald stopped him cold. Turned out he had watched everything from the start, the man breaking into my car, rifling through my belongings, never once lifted a finger. I didn't want trouble, he stammered. Fitzgerald's jaw tightened with every excuse. When they ran the description Brenda and I gave, it matched a wanted man tied to 3 kidnappings across Arizona and New Mexico. His name was Robert Henley. He preyed on women traveling alone, always at lonely stops. What haunts me still is what they uncovered behind the station. Henley's rusty pickup hidden under cover. In its bed, beneath a tarp, zip ties, duct tape, a shovel. Worse, a notebook filled with notes on women he'd stalked, their license plates and routes. Mine wasn't written yet. I'd been chance, nothing more. Fitzgerald later told me I was lucky. The other 3 women hadn't been found. Brenda stayed with me the whole time, even followed me to the next town to ensure I had a safe motel. She pressed her number into my hand, made me promise to call when I reached Los Angeles. My car was impounded as evidence, so I rented one to finish the trip. 2 days later, they caught Henley at another gas station, trying the same trick. This time the clerk called 911 fast. He's serving life now, though the missing women remain gone. I still make the California drive sometimes, but never stop at isolated stations again. And always, I think of Brenda the trucker who saved my life without a second's hesitation. Growing up in rural Utah, I thought the worst part of driving at night was dodging deer. That belief shattered in spring of 2017 when my younger sister, Megan, and I set out to visit our aunt in Phoenix. I was 23, working as a dental hygienist in Salt Lake City. Megan was 21, nearly done with her nursing degree at BYU. We'd made the drive countless times, usually leaving Friday evenings to beat the weekend traffic. That night we rolled out around 8:30, expecting to reach Phoenix by 3 a.m. The skies were clear, the road empty, a cooler packed with Red Bulls and the gas station taquitos Megan adored. A couple hours south of Cedar City, I noticed headlights trailing us. The highway was deserted except for the occasional semi. Yet this car stayed behind for nearly 15 minutes, never too far, never too close. Megan dozed beside me, feet on the dashboard, despite my constant nagging. The radio played some late-night conspiracy talk show, the host droning about government surveillance, ironic, considering what was coming. Suddenly, the car surged forward, lights flashing red and blue. My heart skipped, but the vehicle wasn't a cruiser. No markings, no rooftop bar, Just cheap dash lights anyone could buy online. I'd heard of unmarked cars catching speeders though. Slowing, I nudged Megan awake. She blinked, confused. "Were you speeding?" she mumbled. I shook my head. Cruise had been locked at 75 since we left. The shoulder was narrow, little more than gravel sliding into black sagebrush, but I pulled. Over in the mirror, I watched a man step out. Tall, maybe 6'2", in dark jeans and a plain black windbreaker. No uniform, no badge. His stride was deliberate, like he was performing authority rather than owning it. One hand hovered near his hip where a weapon might sit, though I couldn't see. The other clutched a flashlight, aimed oddly at the ground. When he reached my window, I cracked it only 2 inches. Up close, his face was plain but unsettling mid-freeze. Clean-shaven, eyes sunken, and a scar trailing from ear to jaw like a crooked question mark carved into his flesh. "License and registration," he murmured, voice wrong, too soft, too hushed, as if avoiding witnesses. No introduction, no reason for the stop. Megan froze, breath sharp and shallow. My purse lay in the back, and as I stretched for it, his tone sharpened. "Both of you, out of the vehicle." The way he said it froze my blood. Not a request, a command. His hand drummed against whatever sat at his hip. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, my voice tight. He didn't reply, just repeated the order, louder. Megan's nails dug into my arm. Neither of us moved. Then salvation appeared. Another pair of headlights growing large behind us. A marked sheriff's cruiser. The word sheriff blazed in reflective letters across its side as it slowed behind him. The man stiffened, jaw clenching, shoulders taut. The deputy climbed out, a woman, compact but solid, radio already in hand. The instant her eyes locked on him, she drew her weapon. "Step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them," she yelled. The man with the scar didn't bolt. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me through my window with this look I'll never forget, like a hunter whose prey had just been snatched from him. What followed was complete chaos. The deputy barked out orders while calling for backup over her radio. He lifted his hands slowly, still locking eyes with us, especially with Megan. Even with a gun trained on him, his face showed more irritation than fear. She made him back toward her, made him kneel. All the moves you've seen 100 times on cop shows. But the tension in her voice told me this wasn't routine. She knew exactly who she had in front of her. "Stay in your car, lock the doors," she commanded, never glancing away from him. I didn't hesitate to slam the lock button like it might shatter under my thumb. The man never said a single word. He obeyed each command with this unnerving composure that somehow made everything worse. Within minutes, the quiet stretch of highway transformed into a full-blown crime scene. 3 more cruisers showed up, sirens wailing, red and blue strobes painting the desert around us. Officers closed in on his car, flashlights probing the shadows, while he sat cuffed in the back of the first cruiser. The deputy who had stopped him came over to check on us. Her badge read Deputy Vasquez. Up close, I could see relief fighting with anger across her face. "You two were smart to stay put," she said, casting a glance back at the man in her car. "We've been after him for 3 months. She told us his name, at least the one he was using this time. Nathan Crow. Not his real name. Just another alias. She explained he'd been pulling this same act across Utah, Nevada, and Colorado, always zeroing in on women driving alone or in pairs, always in the dead of night, always on desolate highways. They had records of at least 4 attempted abductions tied to him, maybe more unreported. When deputies tore through his vehicle, they found everything you'd expect from a nightmare. Zip ties, duct tape, a stolen police scanner, a set of those cheap magnetic emergency lights anyone could buy online. In the glove box, they uncovered multiple IDs, all fake, all plastered with his scarred face. And tucked in there was a notebook, filled with license plates, car descriptions, notes about who he'd tailed. Vasquez wouldn't let us see the details, but her eyes said plenty. The worst discovery was a police uniform, complete with a badge convincing enough to fool anyone under low light. She said he was escalating, getting braver. In Colorado, he'd actually managed to lure a woman out of her vehicle before a passing trucker scared him away. She'd been gone 6 hours before they located her, terrified but alive, abandoned at a remote rest area 50 miles away. Megan stayed silent the whole time, clutching my hand, tears streaking down her cheeks. When Vasquez asked if we'd pressed charges, it almost sounded absurd until she explained that some women couldn't go through with it. Too traumatized to testify, we both said yes instantly. They took our statements right there by the roadside, desert wind pushing through the sagebrush. Every single detail felt urgent now. How long he'd shadowed us, what he'd said, that jagged scar. Other deputies documented everything. Our vehicle, where we'd stopped, even the tire marks in the gravel. One mentioned Crow had likely been scanning police chatter, waiting for nights when units were spread thin. If Vasquez hadn't happened to be looping back from a domestic call just 5 miles away, we wouldn't be standing there. They held us for nearly 2 hours, both to get evidence and to make sure we were steady enough to drive. Vasquez gave us her personal number, told us to call when we made it to Phoenix. She even set up a cruiser to escort us to the next town. As we were preparing to leave, I saw them transferring Crow into a transport van. He turned his head toward our car, eyes locked on us, and even at that distance, I could see his lips moving. I'll never know what he mouthed. I don't want to. Vasquez caught it too, stepped in front of our view, and said, "Don't give him any more of your energy. He's finished." Later we learned he was already out on parole for a 2015 assault case, with the new charges impersonating an officer. Attempted abduction. The deputy figured he'd serve 15 to 20 years. Asterisk, the drive to Phoenix afterward felt unreal. Megan and I barely spoke. We just held hands across the console, me keeping a death grip on the wheel, sticking religiously to the speed limit. Every pair of headlights behind us made my heart hammer. We stopped once in St. George for gas, but I couldn't make myself leave the truck. Megan had to pump while I stayed inside, scanning the shadows with the doors locked. We rolled into her aunt's place at sunrise, drained but alive. The months that followed weren't easy. Nightmares haunted me, dreams of that scar, of flashing lights on empty highways. Megan switched to daytime shifts once she graduated, refusing to drive at night anymore. 6 months later, we testified in his trial, along with 3 other women. The jury convicted him on every count. He drew an 18-year sentence. The prosecutor told us our testimony carried the most weight because we'd stayed locked in and because Vasquez had nailed him in the act. Even now, I still make the trip to Phoenix sometimes, but never at night. And I always tell people that same thing. If something feels off during a traffic stop, listen to that instinct. Real cops won't mind if you call 911 to confirm. That locked door, that tiny window gap, that moment of hesitation, that's what saved us. The mechanic at the station had grease caked under his fingernails and a whistle between his teeth from a missing incisor. Brandon and I had pulled into his shop near Holbrook because the Ford Ranger, his brother's old truck, started grinding whenever we hit 60. The mechanic told us it was just a loose heat shield, nothing dangerous, then leaned in like he was giving us a secret. Said we could shave 2 hours off the trip to Phoenix if we took what he called the Old Cattle Road. Instead of staying on I-40, he sketched a crude map on the back of our receipt, oil smudges all over the paper. Said to get off at mile marker 47, follow a dirt road 20 miles until a yellow water tower, then turn left. Easy. We were already running late after wasting time at the petrified forest earlier that day. It was around 3 p.m., the March sun beating down hard, and the Ranger's AC barely wheezed. Windows down, music blasting. Just 2 kids from Michigan, thinking we were chasing adventure. Brandon leaned his arm out the window, surfing the air. pointing out rock shapes and broken down buildings as we passed. We'd been inseparable since freshman year, bonding over late-night FIFA matches and hating the same calculus professor. This trip was supposed to be our last free ride before the weight of internships and careers closed in. Neither of us could have guessed that before sunset, we'd be wondering if we'd make it back at all. Mile 47 came faster than expected. The turnoff wasn't marked, just a gap in the guardrail leading into desert. Brandon cross-checked the map, while I eased the truck down the dirt road. At first it was manageable hard-packed soil, the occasional rut. We spotted a few ruins within the first couple miles. A lone gas pump rusting away, a collapsed shack leaning on one hinge. Brandon snapped photos, saying his Instagram followers would lose it. The terrain was alien to us: red rock, thorny brush, tall cacti stretching like arms in the wind. 10 miles in, things got strange. The track tightened, forcing me to crawl at 15. No cars, no signal on our phones since 5 miles back, and no yellow water tower. Instead, we started seeing crosses hammered together from fence posts, draped with sun-bleached fabric. At first, just a handful, then one every 100 yards. Some had fake flowers, others had trinket skis, ribbons, toys. Brandon stopped taking pictures. He went quiet. Even the radio turned to static, so I shut it off. Just the engine hum and crunching. Tires dot at 20 miles. Still no water tower. Just endless scrub and a ridge of red cliffs. Brandon urged me to turn back, but I pushed further. Turning around on the narrow road would be tough, and we'd already come so far. That's when we noticed the first shoe. A little pink sneaker, dangling from a mesquite branch, maybe toddler-sized. Then more boots, flip-flops, running shoes suspended in the branches like grotesque ornaments. Hundreds of them swaying, creaking in the hot breeze. Some nearly new, others falling apart. Around the next bend stood a farmhouse ripped from a nightmare. The main house sagged into itself, windows hollowed out, but it was the barn that froze us. Every inch of its weathered siding was covered in doll parts, plastic arms, porcelain heads nailed, in no order at all. Out front, baby carriages sat in a perfect circle, all facing inward. Old strollers, antique prams, modern joggers. Bone-like wind chimes clattered in the dry air. Across the drive, an old school bus sat on its frame, tires gone, yellow paint peeling. Scrawled across the side in red, Matthew 19:14. Brandon's breathing turned rapid. I shoved the truck into reverse, trying to back out, but the window and the barn loft caught my eye. A figure motionless, just a silhouette, watching. No shifting, no blinking, just standing like a scarecrow. Brandon spotted him too and let out a noise I'd never heard before. I backed up faster, tires spitting, dust. The figure never moved, but now the front door creaked open, rusty hinges screeching across the stillness. Someone stepped out, moving with a stilted, broken gait. Then came the sound of another engine. My blood ran cold. A gray Chevy pickup had blocked the road 50 yards back. We hadn't heard it approach. 2 men climbed out, each holding something in their hands. Brandon was panicking, repeating, "Go, go, go." I threw the truck forward, searching for any space to turn between the school bus and rusted farm gear. The figure from the house staggered closer now, a woman in a filthy dress dragging something through the dirt. The 2 men advanced, too slow, confident, certain we had no escape. One wore a butcher's apron, dark stains smeared across it. Finally, I spotted a slim gap between the bus and an old tractor. I yanked the wheel hard, flooring it. The side mirror screeched along the bus, sparks flying. We jolted over something I didn't look to see what. Then we were past, barreling down a hidden trail I hadn't noticed before. Just 2 ruts weaving into brush. Brandon twisted in his seat, yelling they were following 2 vehicles now, knowing the land better than us. The path wound through a grove of pale dead trees, their trunks like bleached bones. I pushed the Ranger too hard, skidding on corners, slamming over rocks, but I couldn't lift my foot on in the mirror. I saw the Chevy still, chasing, dust boiling behind it. Another car followed too, maybe the woman's. Our speedometer swung past 40. 50, it felt like 100 on that track. The trail dumped us onto a broader dirt road. I picked right at random, praying it led to civilization. Brandon stretched, his arm out the window, desperate for a signal bar. Nothing. The sun was sinking, shadows reaching long across the sand like grasping fingers. More dust rose behind us. They were gaining. Then Brandon spotted a hole in the tailgate. A bullet strike, fresh. We hadn't even heard the shot. My gut twisted. The road rose into hills, the truck straining, temp needle edging red. We rounded a blind curve and nearly smashed head into a sheriff's cruiser. I slammed the brakes, the Ranger skidding sideways across the road. The deputy jumped out, hand hovering over his weapon, and that's when it hit me, how insane we must have looked, caked in dust, eyes wide with terror, tearing down the back roads like fugitives. Brandon jumped out of the truck before it had even rolled to a complete stop, stumbling toward the deputy, trying frantically to explain about the farmstead, the chase, the people after us. His words tumbled out in a mess, barely making sense. The deputy, his nameplate read Officer Briggs, raised a hand to steady him, then glanced past us, looking down the road we had just come from. No dust clouds, no headlights, nothing but a stretch of empty desert highway, fading into the dark. He circled our truck, pausing at the bullet hole, running his finger along the ragged metal edge. Then he told us to slow down and start from the beginning. I recounted everything, the mechanic, the shortcut, what we'd seen out there. While I spoke, he kept stealing looks back at the road, and I noticed his hand never moved away from the grip of his holstered gun. When I finished, he stood silently for a long moment, the weight of his thoughts hanging heavy. Finally, he told us to follow him back toward the interstate, said we were lucky, explained that the land we'd driven through was private property, and the people living out there didn't take well to strangers. He wouldn't say more, just repeated that we were fortunate to have made it out. We trailed Officer Briggs for nearly 20 minutes on winding dirt roads I never could have navigated. Alone, neither Brandon nor I spoke a word. Relief hit hard when the asphalt of the interstate finally appeared. At the on-ramp, the deputy pulled over, walked up to my window, and instructed us to drive straight to Phoenix without stopping. No more shortcuts, he said flatly. Stay on the main roads. Then he added something that still makes my skin crawl. And if you boys are smart, you'll forget about filing a report. Sometimes you should just be grateful you got out alive. He waited until we merged onto the highway before turning back the way we had come. Brandon and I drove non-stop for 3 hours before pulling into Phoenix, finally parking at a busy truck stop lit up bright, with people everywhere. We never did reach Texas. Instead, the next morning we turned around and drove straight back to Michigan, taking turns at the wheel, stopping only for gas. We didn't mention filing a report. We didn't even tell Brandon's brother about the bullet hole. Claimed it must have been there before, and we'd overlooked it. But late at night, I sometimes searched the internet for that stretch of desert, hoping to find a mention of the farmstead. The rows of crosses, those shoes hanging in the trees. Nothing ever comes up. It's like the place doesn't exist at all. Maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that the mechanic had known exactly where he was sending us, and I am certain we weren't the first people he directed down that road. The drive from Reno to Houston should have been simple 30 hours of interstate, endless podcasts, and cheap coffee from gas stations. I'd made long hauls plenty of times before as a medical equipment sales rep, but this trip in October of 2016 felt different right from the start. Maybe it was the divorce papers riding shotgun in the passenger seat, or the reality that at 34 years old, I was essentially beginning my life all over again. Either way, 12 hours into the trip, I pulled into a massive truck stop just over the state line. The place buzzed with activity, 18-wheelers stacked in rows, families stretching their legs, truckers drifting in and out of the attached store. A neon sign for Rosie's 24-hour diner flickered in the twilight, and my stomach reminded me it had been empty since breakfast. Inside, the diner carried that timeless feel truck stops always seem to have: checkered floors, red vinyl booths, the smell of bacon grease that clung like history itself. I slid into a booth near the window, keeping an eye on my car outside. The waitress who came over had bleached blonde hair piled up high, a name tag that said Darlene. She couldn't have been older than 22, with striking green eyes like sea glass. She took my order, chicken fried steak and coffee, with a warm smile that suggested she actually enjoyed being there. That's when I noticed him. A man at the counter, maybe mid-40s, wearing a faded denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt. He looked unremarkable, except for how intently he watched Darlene as she worked. Not in a casual way, but like a predator eyeing prey. Halfway through my meal, he got up and slid into the booth directly behind me. I heard the squeak of the vinyl and felt the prickling awareness at the back of my neck. He ordered pie and a glass of milk can, odd choice for dinner. Then he leaned forward, speaking through the gap between booths. Long drive ahead. His voice was raspy, pleasant enough, like an old smoker's. I gave a vague answer and focused on my plate, but he persisted, asking where I was going, if I was alone, what kind of car I drove. Each question felt deliberate, as if he were collecting data. When I mentioned Houston, he let out a strange, breathy laugh and said, "That's funny. I'm headed that way too. Maybe we'll run into each other again." When Darlene came by to top off my coffee, I caught his reflection in the window. His entire expression changed, flat, cold, mechanical as he stared at her. She must have sensed it too, because she hurried away, casting him a quick glance that looked like recognition, or fear. I wanted to ask her if she was all right, but when she brought the check, she avoided my eyes. The man behind me had fallen silent, but I could feel him there, breathing. My appetite vanished. I left a 20 on the table, stood up, and as I walked past his booth, he looked at me with pale gray eyes and smiled. "Safe travels," he said, and the way he lingered on safe made my skin crawl. Outside, the parking lot felt darker, despite the bright lights buzzing overhead. I nearly jogged to my car, fumbling for the keys. Through the diner window, I saw him back at the counter, positioned where he could see everything: the dining room, the hallway leading to the restrooms. Darlene was serving another customer, but her eyes kept flicking toward that hallway, like she was planning an escape. I sat in my car, engine running, debating whether to go back inside and warn her. But warn her of what? That a man was creeping me out. Under the harsh fluorescent glow, my fear felt irrational, almost embarrassing. Still, a cold certainty pressed on me that something bad was going to happen. I drove for 2 more hours, mind replaying the whole encounter, before stopping at a motel in Amarillo. I hardly slept, checking locks over and over, a chair wedged beneath the knob. The next morning, while eating a motel breakfast, the news came on. The reporter stood outside Rosie's diner. My spoon fell from my hand when I heard her words. A 22-year-old waitress, found murdered in the employee restroom, suspected homicide. The blurry security still showed a man following her. The denim jacket, the posture, it was him. The victim's name was Darlene Foster. She'd been saving money for nursing school, only working there 3 months, they said. She'd been strangled with her own apron strings at 11:47 p.m., barely an hour after I'd left. The footage showed him trailing her into that back hallway at las 11:21, Página M. Just 15 minutes after I'd walked out. If I had lingered, stayed for more coffee, I might have been there maybe to help, or maybe as another victim. I called the tip line from my motel room, my voice shaking as I described everything. Detective Judith Brennan phoned me back, her calm voice making the nightmare feel all too real. She asked for every detail: scars, mannerisms, vehicle. I remembered a dark blue Ford pickup with Oklahoma plates, an extended cab with a toolbox. In the bed, her silence told me it mattered. I spent 2 hours with a sketch artist, trying to capture those lifeless gray eyes. She thanked me repeatedly, said my information was crucial, but all I could think was how I'd left Darlene behind. The rest of my drive to Houston was a blur of paranoia, flinching at every blue pickup, gripping the wheel until my knuckles hurt. In Oklahoma, I nearly panicked at the sight of one until I realized it was driven by an elderly woman. I made it to Houston, but couldn't bring myself to stay in the hotel. Instead, I stayed with my sister Gloria, telling her only that I was exhausted. 3 days later, Detective Brennan called again. They'd arrested someone, Douglas Wade Hutchinson, a long-haul trucker with assault charges in 3 states. The sketch had nailed him. What shattered me most came during the trial. Prosecutors revealed he'd been stalking Darlene for weeks, eating at the diner every Thursday night, always in her section, always until closing. Other waitresses had warned her, but she brushed it off, saying she needed the tips. He'd followed her before, testing boundaries. The night I was there wasn't random, it had been building toward that moment. My presence, they said, had delayed him. If I hadn't been there, it might have happened sooner. He was sentenced to life without parole, no emotion on his face as the verdict came. But Darlene's mother's words broke me. She said her daughter always called after work to say she was safe. That night, when the phone never rang, she drove out and found police tape, flashing lights. Her daughter's car still in the lot. She looked straight at the camera and said whoever had tipped off police had given her family the only comfort left, that he couldn't hurt anyone else's child. I closed my laptop after hearing her statement and cried harder than I ever had before. 7 years have passed, and I still can't bring myself to set foot in a truck stop diner. I tried going back once, about a year after the trial, convincing myself that maybe facing the fear head-on was the only way forward. But the instant I slid into the booth, and the waitress approached with her notepad, I was transported straight back to Rosie's. I could feel him behind me again, his breath warm on my neck, those cold gray eyes locked onto Darlene as she moved between tables. I bolted before I could order. Some nights, I find myself typing Darlene Foster's name into Google, scrolling through the handful of photos still floating online. Her high school graduation shot, a grainy picture from the diner's Facebook page where she's laughing with coworkers. She would have been 29 now. Maybe she'd have finished nursing school. Maybe she'd be married, raising kids of her own. I keep thinking about the 37 minutes between me leaving and him following her into that restroom. Rationally, I know staying wouldn't have changed anything. He had been planning it for weeks. He would have taken another chance. Detective Brennan even told me that walking away might have spared my life, that Douglas's truck held enough supplies to suggest he intended more than one victim. And yet, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in the dark, I replay it all. I see Darlene's strained smile, the way she avoided my eyes. I still feel the weight of that half-drunk coffee, and I wonder, endlessly, if there was anything else I could have done. It was the 4th day of a cross-country trip we'd been talking about since spring. I was 19, fresh out of community college, determined to see the Pacific at least once. There was me, Dion, with his beat-up teal Aerostar van his uncle had passed down, his cousin Riley, and Riley's roommate Lenny. None of us had ever been farther west than Tennessee. We packed light, pooled gas money, rotated drivers, slept in shifts, and lived off vending machine snacks and dollar menu burgers. It was freedom in the messiest, greasiest sense of the word. That morning we checked out of a rundown motel off the interstate in southern New Mexico. Riley was already outside smoking when I stepped into the sun. The place was crumbling, half boarded up, tucked along a dusty service road with only a gas station and abandoned depot nearby. We'd checked in under Dion's name the night before. $28 split 4 ways. The desk clerk, a thin man with a limp and a shirt hanging loose on his frame, handed us the key and muttered, "Lock both bolts. Kids like you don't usually stop here." We'd laughed it off. But daylight made the place worse. The Coke machine shattered with a bullet hole, a heap of broken hubcaps rotting in the weeds. Still, the mood wasn't bad. I snapped a photo of the guys leaning on the van before we rolled out. That photo ended up in every article written after we pulled onto the highway around 10:30, heading west toward El Paso and hoping to hit Arizona by nightfall. The desert sun glared so hard off the windshield it nearly erased the map Riley traced with his finger in the passenger seat. About 40 minutes later, we stopped at a shabby diner off a frontage road, the kind with a buzzing sign and a waitress who called everyone hun. I ordered coffee and a greasy ham sandwich that dripped butter through the toast. We weren't inside long, half an hour at most. Lenny pointed out a man in the parking lot, leaning against a rust-colored pickup, staring at our license plate. Said the guy wouldn't take his eyes off it. None of us cared much. Figured he was some local who thought out tough state plates meant easy money. He never came inside, never said a word. By the time we left, he was gone. I only remember that strange stillness about him, like he was holding a pose. Later, we made jokes, called him the New Mexico plate inspector. Then the road swallowed us again, mile after mile of heat and scrub. Riley fiddled with the radio, fighting static. I drifted off sometime afternoon. When I woke, the van was silent, parked outside. Nothing looked familiar, just rows of corrugated warehouses and vacant loading docks. The light was flat, washed out, as if the air itself had bled of color. Dion sat motionless at the wheel, eyes forward. Riley paced outside, checking his watch like waiting on someone. Lenny chewed a straw wrapper in uncharacteristic silence. I asked why we'd stopped. Dion muttered, "We're waiting," but wouldn't say for what. Confused, I stepped out. Heat radiated from the pavement, chemical smells drifting faintly. I pressed Riley, but he only shrugged, muttering that this spot was not that far off track. Then he asked if I remembered the man from the diner. I said yes, the guy with the truck. Riley told me we were supposed to meet him. I laughed, expecting the punchline, but his face was grave, resigned, like this moment had been decided long before. That's when I noticed all the van doors were unlocked. Dion's key turned halfway, but the engine dead. I offered to check under the hood. He told me not to, just like that. Not angry final. Something was wrong. They weren't themselves anymore. It was like they were following a script I hadn't been given. I dug my film camera from my bag and snapped a shot of the empty lot. Later, when I developed it, the image came out gray, nearly blank. I reached into the van cooler for a soda and noticed something stuck beneath the wiper. A napkin folded tight. None of us had gotten out before. In faint pencil were 4 words, "You're almost out west." The handwriting didn't belong to any of us. Riley read it over my shoulder, pocketed, and without comment, I said we should leave, now. No one moved. Minutes dragged on, the sun cooking the air. Riley stared at the napkin. Dion's eyes were distant. Lenny kept glancing behind us, like someone was due any second. Finally, I shouted to go. Dion tried the ignition. The engine coughed and died. Again, nothing. Gas gauge still high. My stomach sank. I grabbed my bag, said I'd walk to the highway. Riley only said, "You won't find it." That line still echoes in my head. I went anyway. The stillness was crushing. No wind, no birds, nothing but rows of metal buildings, stretching on and on. I walked straight for what felt like half an hour, but the scenery never shifted. Doubled back, Tried to find landmarks, there were none. When I returned, the lot was empty. The van was gone. No tracks, no sound, just heat waves rising off bare pavement. I screamed their names until my voice shredded. Nothing answered. I stayed until dusk painted the shadows long. Then nothing. The next thing I remember is waking behind another building near a freight yard, lights buzzing overhead. A trucker found me, said I was dehydrated, half delirious. They took me to a clinic in El Paso. I told everyone, nurses, cops, about my friends, the van, the napkin. The police found no trace. A few days later, Dion's Aerostar turned up at a shipping terminal outside the city, locked, keys in the ignition, bags untouched, a sack of fast food on the passenger floor, receipt dated 2 days after I lost them. No sign of Dion, Riley, or Lenny, and when I searched missing persons databases later, they weren't there. No DMV records, nothing, like they'd been erased. All I have is that one photo of them leaning against the van, taken the morning we left. I scanned it, backed it up, guarded obsessively. The napkin, though, I'll never forget. Those faint graphite words, "You're almost out west." I never learned what it meant, or who wrote it. But I know I wasn't supposed to survive that lot. Every retelling feels like unearthing something better left buried. For years, I mocked people who claimed they needed to find themselves. Then my life unraveled, marriage gone, job gone, the man I thought I was gone. I was still signing Ethan Merrill, 34, Eugene, Oregon, sitting alone in an apartment stripped of laughter. When the divorce settled, I stuffed clothes, notebooks, a camera, and a cooler of protein bars and gas station coffee into the car. No plan, just a vague pull toward Texas. For a few days, the road soothed me. Teeny towns, mildew-soaked motels, journals filled with overheard conversations. Then, near the California-Nevada line, I realized I wasn't alone. That dark blue pickup, same dented bumper, same crooked mirror, reappearing in my rear view again and again, no matter where I turned off. I spotted it outside a diner in some nowhere town, parked silently across the street. I forced myself inside, ordered soup and grilled cheese, chatted with a waitress who wanted my life story. When I came back out, the truck was gone, vanished. I wrote in my journal, either I'm being followed or I'm losing my mind. Not sure which terrifies me more. 3 nights later, my GPS froze, looped blank screens, pushed me down a wooded service road. Rain-soaked mud slicked the ground. Trees leaned inward, narrowing the path. When I tapped the brakes, the pedal sank to the floor. No resistance. The car spun into a ditch, slammed into a tree, airbags exploding. For long seconds, I sat in silence, chest pounding. Finally, I climbed out. The forest was unnervingly still. No birds, no wind, just silence pressing down. I checked the hood. My stomach dropped. The brake line wasn't frayed. It was cut, clean. Recently, I stood frozen, unable to deny it. Maybe a branch, I tried to tell myself. Maybe torn in the crash. But I knew better. I grabbed my flashlight and journal, planning to walk back. Then I saw it, a slip of paper, tucked under the rear wiper. Dry left after the storm. 4 words in heavy ink. Stay off this road. No signature. My throat tightened. I scanned the trees, their trunks unnaturally uniform, planted decades ago, stretching like a maze. My car was hidden, my world reduced to silence. I started walking, steps crunching in wet leaves. After 20 minutes, I heard it. Footsteps, matching mine, stopping when I stopped, then breathing steady, shallow, close. I didn't turn, didn't run. I just veered into the woods, killed the flashlight, crouched behind a fallen trunk. My heart counted minutes into an hour as the breathing lingered, then faded. Cold seeped into my bones. When I finally moved, it was only because my body refused to stay still. Headlights eventually cut through the dark tow truck and sheriff's SUV. Relief surged, but died fast. The deputies treated me like a trespasser. They pulled my car out, interrogated me 2 hours roadside. I told them everything: the brake line, the note, the footsteps, the breathing. Blank faces. We'll file it. Hunters play pranks. One said I asked for the note. They swore it never existed, but I'd left it on the seat, tucked into my journal. It was gone. I caught a bus out the next morning, journal pressed tight to my chest. Haven't driven since. Abandoned the idea of finding myself. What stalked me that night didn't want me dead. It wanted me afraid. Playing a long game. I still have the journal. The last line reads, "Don't trust the road, don't trust the quiet." My therapist calls it trauma, paranoia. Maybe, but the late night blocked calls keep coming. No words, just silence. Almost a year now. Police ruled it mechanical failure. Officially, unofficially, I believe something else. That road isn't on any map. Service Road 11B doesn't exist. It was a place carved out of nowhere, waiting for me. And something was there long before I arrived.